Good afternoon, everyone. It's truly a privilege to join you as we gather to mark the 2025 International Women's Day, a day we come together to celebrate the incredible achievements of women around the world and to reflect on the ongoing struggles we must face in the pursuit of equality, justice, and freedom. My name is Katie Kiss. I'm a proud Kanju and Biri Witty woman from far north Queensland. I grew up on the lands of the Darrinbal people in Rockhampton and now live on Yagara country in Meganjin or Meanjin here in Brisbane. I was hoping to be with you all in person today, but an unpredictable, not so gentle man, Cyclone Alfred, has prevented that. I'm so disappointed that I'm missing out on this celebration of strong, deadly women today, but I am with you all in spirit. So, as you all gather on the beautiful lands of the Gimoy Wallabari Yidinji peoples, I pay my respects to their ancestors and elders, past, present, and emerging, of both the Gimoy Wallabari Yidinji and the Yagara peoples on whose lands I come to you from today. I also acknowledge all First Nations people and our non Indigenous allies in the room with you today. Thank you to Auntie Henrietta for her warm and generous welcome to country. I always appreciate the history and truth that Auntie Henrietta shares when she welcomes us on her country, and I share with you that Auntie Henrietta supported the Human Rights Commission in its work to promote the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples here in Australia over 10 years ago when she was with the Christensen Foundation. And of course, thank you to Cape York Partnerships for inviting me to speak today. A special shout out to Cape York Partnerships CEO Fiona Jose, an incredible, strong, and courageous Black woman who I have known and worked with for many years. Thank you, Fiona, for your commitment and leadership to improving the lives of our mob, particularly our people in Cape York and the far north. But I also acknowledge the work you do nationally. Speaking at today's event brings back great memories of my early days in my professional career at Cape York Land Council and coming across to Cape York Partnerships, where I worked for nearly 3 years. I lived in Cairns for 10 years, moving there from Rocky with my two little girls when I was 22. My son was born there, and so Cairns and the Cape feel like home for me. Before I move on, I also want to personally acknowledge the many women in this room and all those who aren't across this country and the world who have supported me in my journey. But in particular, I want to acknowledge three women in my life who, without them, I wouldn't be here with you today. Firstly, my foster mum, Harriet Vivi, who took me and my little sister in when I was 12 years old. My mum passed away when I was 6, and Dad struggled as a man left to raise two little girls on his own. And secondly, my daughter's grandmothers, Janie Mason and Julie Ingra. These women supported me as a young woman, as a mother, and as an advocate. These women treated me like their own daughter. They looked after my babies so that I could do what I needed to do, study, work, and travel, to be here in this place, in this role with you today. I have been truly blessed to have been surrounded by a strong village of women who have had my back and continue to. So, a little bit about my role, to which I was appointed in April last year. As Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, I have three key functions that are outlined in the Australian Human Rights Commission Act 1986. They are to monitor the exercise and enjoyment of human rights by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to promote discussion, awareness, and respect for the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and to examine policy and legislation to make sure they recognise and protect the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. In addition to those three key functions, I also have a responsibility to report to the Federal Attorney General about the operation of the Native Title Act 1993 and its effect on the exercise and enjoyment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It was not long after commencing in my role that work began on my first project as Commissioner, the Informing the Agenda National Listening Tour. Continuing the consultative, engaging, and open leadership styles that former social justice commissioners have embraced, the National Listening Tour is all about hearing directly from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in communities across Australia about the things that matter most to them and what their priorities are for me to focus on during my 5-year term as Social Justice Commissioner. In addition to being on the road for in-person community roundtables, we called for submissions and conducted a survey, all in the hope that as many First Nations people as possible could have their say. The national tour is starting to wind up, and I intend on releasing a discussion paper highlighting what was heard during the Informing the Agenda project later this year. Over the course of my term, I intend to release 3 reports that speak to the state of the nation on policy and legislation that impact on the exercise and enjoyment of human rights by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. For those unfamiliar, the Social Justice and Native Title reports document the human rights and policy history of Indigenous affairs over more than 30 years. Informed by our people, they help to charter the course for a fair and just future for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and they build on 2 of the most critical truth-telling publications in Australia's history to date: the 1991 report of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, and the 1997 Bringing Them Home report of the National Inquiry into the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. It goes without saying that the Commission, as Australia's national human rights institution, paired with the never say never approach taken by our former social justice commissioners, Mick Dodson, Bill Jonas, Tom Calmer, Mick Gooder, and June Oscar, have led and incubated human rights-based initiatives informed by our people. But as I stand on the shoulders of these giants here today, I reflect on the work of former Commissioner June Oscar, a proud Bunamba woman and the first woman to be formally appointed to this position, to remind us as women of what is possible. It was with the intention of positioning First Nations women's rights front and centre during her appointment that the former Commissioner launched the Wiyanayu Women's Voices Project in 2017. Building on the Women's Business Report of the Aboriginal Women's Task Force in 1996, the Wiyanayu project highlighted the need to take a strengths-based approach in policy that acknowledges the distinct skills, knowledges and potential of First Nations women and girls in Australia. The work of the former Commissioner and the elevation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's voices all over the country, who spoke of matriarchal lines and the responsibilities that keep them motivated in the face of adversity, culminated in the establishment of the Wiyanayu Institute for First Nations Gender Justice at the Australian National University in March last year. Led by June, the Institute is marching forward to deliver on those recommendations and to realise the rights of our women and girls. This year's International Women's Day theme is March Forward for all women and girls, rights, equality and empowerment, a timely call to action that recognises the strides we have made while reminding us all that the march towards gender justice and gender equality is far from over. Today we come together not only to celebrate how far we've come, but to renew our commitment to creating a world where all women and girls, and particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls, can live with dignity, respect and opportunity. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women have always been leaders in their communities, even when their leadership has been deliberately silenced. Their resilience in the face of ongoing adversity is an inspiration, and their leadership continues to shape not just First Nations communities, but the broader Australian society. From the kitchen tables of our nannies and aunties to the lecture halls of universities and houses of parliament, to the women I stand alongside today. First Nations women's leadership is a pivotal force for self-determined solutions that empower our families and communities. As we look around, it isn't hard to find a First Nations woman who exemplifies the strength, intelligence and determination fighting for a better future. These women and many others have stood in the face of systemic injustice and pushed forward with courage and conviction to create pathways for future generations. Whether advocating at the grassroots level or within the halls of Parliament, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women continue to lead the way forward. Their voices and actions inspire change, driving us towards a more just and equitable future. They demonstrate that leadership takes many forms, both visible and behind the scenes, but always with an unshakable commitment to community, justice, and cultural preservation. Despite the significant contributions First Nations women have made to political, social, and cultural life, they remain underrepresented in decision-making bodies, and their leadership is often relegated to the margins. As we march forward, we must ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's voices are not only heard, but that they are placed at the table where decisions are made. Decisions that affect not just their communities, but all of Australia. Our leadership, wisdom, and cultural knowledge continue to be the backbone of our communities, despite facing ongoing systemic barriers that deny our basic human rights. Barriers built upon centuries of dispossession, colonialism, discrimination, and violence. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women do not just face gender based discrimination, they experience compounded disadvantage because of both their gender and their cultural identity. This intersectionality shapes their experience in ways that must be acknowledged and addressed if we are to move forward as a truly just and equitable society. Compounding experiences of racism and discrimination have been faced since colonisation and dispossession, where First Nations societies and structures and laws were disrupted, and the exploitation and abuse faced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people was often gendered, with First Nations women and girls subjected to forced menial and domestic labour and physical and sexual abuse. The right to live free from violence is a fundamental human right, and yet for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, violence is an all too familiar part of life. Whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, or violence within institutional settings, First Nations women continue to be disproportionately impacted by gender-based violence. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in Australia are also overrepresented in Australia's criminal justice system, with many facing unjust treatment and incarceration, and we are more likely to experience economic disadvantage compared to non-Indigenous women. The 2024 report on missing and murdered First Nations women and children speaks to the extreme disproportionate rates of violence Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women experience because of men's violence and the consistent legal and policing failings endured in the pursuit of justice. The media dehumanises and criminalises our people in the pursuit of sales and clickbait, promoting racist attitudes and mis and disinformation, and the lack of data reinforces government's refusal to develop evidence-based, human rights compliant public policy. It is also important to highlight that this inquiry was championed by and advocated for by First Nations women, who continue to turn up and rally and march and speak up for our sisters who are having their voices ignored. To march forward, our commitment to justice from First Nations advocates must be matched by the media. The media must turn up the volume from silent and strive to provide more context on the systemic nature of domestic violence, especially when experienced by First Nations women and girls who are often misrepresented and or ignored. First Nations women not only experience these overt forms of racism and discrimination, but also face more subtle microaggressions every day, derogatory and hostile behaviours, practices and processes that First Nations Australians must negotiate to access systems that were not designed with them in mind. They more often than not are expected to just fit the mould. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women carry the scars of colonisation, scars that were passed down through generations and in many cases, scars that are yet to fully heal. Those wounds have cut deep, leaving a trail of intergenerational trauma, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women have not let those scars define us. Our women continue to lead the way in their communities, advocating for their families, their cultures, and their rights. But there is still much to be done. The systems that perpetuate violence, inequality, and injustice against First Nations women remain entrenched. We cannot truly march forward as a nation unless we address these issues head on. If we are truly to embrace gender equality, we must ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's identities, our roles, and our responsibilities are understood and respected as human rights. This means ensuring that First Nations women have the same access to justice, healthcare, education, and economic opportunities as anyone else. It means protecting their land, which is inextricably linked to their identity and culture. And it is acknowledging the contributions of First Nations women, which have often extended beyond our families and communities and into the social justice movements. There are so many amazing women deserving of mention, particularly in this part of our world and in this room today. But an example that comes to mind for me is that of Auntie Shirley Smith, known to the Sydney and Redfern community, where I also lived for 10 years. She was known as Mum Shirl, after her brother Laurie was arrested, Auntie Shirley began visiting Sydney's Long Bay Correctional Complex to check on him and other Aboriginal inmates. When guards asked how she was related to the prisoners she wanted to visit, she said she was their mum. Auntie Shirley dedicated her life to community activism that resulted in social reform for Aboriginal Australians and other minority communities throughout the country. In New South Wales, Auntie Shirley was a founding member of the Aboriginal Children's Service, the Aboriginal Medical Service, the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, and the Aboriginal Legal Service. In her autobiography, she wrote, "Many people have told me they think I'm an exception. I'm not. There are many fine Aboriginal people who, with half a chance, would be doing what I am doing now." First Nations women in this country are among the most resilient, yet most marginalised groups in Australian society. But while our resilience is celebrated by prime ministers and those in power, they rely on our resilience to overcome society's failure to respect and realise our rights, to deliver equality, and to create the conditions for our empowerment. It is important to highlight here that when we speak about our resilience, we speak from the perspective of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's lived experience. Resilience is something our mothers, our aunties, and our grandmothers had to have to survive the injustice, the violence, and the oppression, and to ensure better futures for our families and communities in the face of invasion. Our resilience has become critical as we fight to maintain our distinct cultural systems and gender identities within a society that continues to perpetuate the enduring and pervasive legacies of colonisation. However, in saying that, our resilience, through our resistance, is ours to rely upon. In the face of increasing exposure to racism, harm, and inhumane and degrading treatment, our resilience cannot be the crutch that government and others rely upon to negate their human rights obligations and responsibilities to our people, our First Nations women and girls. It must not be the scapegoat for government inaction, incompetence, and antipathy. International Women's Day is a time to reflect on the global struggle for women's rights and gender equality, but it is also a time to recognise that these rights are inextricably linked to the rights of First Nations peoples. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, the March Forward theme holds deep significance. The human rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are not an abstract concept. They are a lived reality that affects every aspect of our lives, and our women have been at the heart of the struggle for justice, equality, and recognition of rights for centuries, not just for our women, but for all women and girls. As we prepare to march forward, the journey toward justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women is deeply tied to the recognition of our full human rights. This includes the right to live free from violence and discrimination, the right to self-determination, the right to access healthcare, and the right to land. Land that for generations of First Nations women before us defined law, culture, and identity, and was never ceded. This means standing with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in their efforts to claim their rightful place through self-determination, to use their voices, to be the leaders in their cultural heritage, and to stand with them in the fight for justice. Our resilience, resistance, and strength are testament to the courage of those who have lived through the darkest chapters of Australian history. And we continue to stand strong in the fight for a better tomorrow, creating pathways for future generations to thrive. Colonisation has taken away so much from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It has done its darndest to break our spirits, but we carry the blood of our ancestors and the DNA of this land. It will never take the strength and wisdom of our women. Marching forward, we must recognise that the fight for gender equality is not a solo endeavour. It is a collective journey requiring solidarity, support, and collaboration across all communities. Together, we can challenge systems of inequality, uplift one another, and create a future where everyone, regardless of gender, can live freely and equally. This journey has never been an easy one. The issues we face are rooted in history and intergenerational trauma. While the solutions to these issues are complex, they must be grounded in respect for First Nations cultures, histories, and knowledge systems. The challenges are immense, but they are not insurmountable. The wisdom and leadership First Nations women continue to guide our paths. We are not simply participants in the struggle for equality. We are warriors and torchbearers. The resilience, strength, and leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women for generations has shown us and continues to show us what is possible when we confront injustice and stand together for a better future. Marching forward, I call on all Australian women and girls to march with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, not just in spirit, but in solidarity, actively working alongside our sisters to address the unique challenges we face, to uplift their voices, centre and embrace their leadership, and ensure that their contributions are never overlooked, but respected and acted upon. Let us march forward with purpose and with determination, standing together in our fight for justice, equality, and recognition to create a future where all women and girls, regardless of their race, culture, or background, are free to live with dignity, equality, and opportunity. Thank you.